Hey guys, long time no see. Let's talk about a game I wanted to love, but ended up hating. Layers of Fear was a game I looked forward to for quite a long time before it was released, and even longer before I could acquire it with currency. I mean, I was so grabbed by the idea of a horror game based on an artist and his paintings. The Slenderman Trenderman died out, and I was curious to see how this game was going to come out. I just loved the aesthetic of it. I'll give Layers of Fear one thing. The first playthrough ever, blind, has a pretty good build-up for the first acts. It does that creepy painting stuff quite well. It's too bad everything between Act 2 and the ending is horribly dull and boring. I see a lot of positive reviews for this game saying how it's so tense, but what's tension without release? Too bad nothing is really established in stone, because everything in this game is left up to interpretation, to a point where it's almost insulting. There are times when leaving things open to interpretation is actually thought-provoking, but Layers of Fear never actually fleshes things out. There were so many ideas posed by the whispered words and notes throughout the game, and the game could have chosen any of those ideas and fleshed any or all of them out. But instead, all of them were only just hinted at and given surface level value, and so they all just fall flat. Even if the game just had more endings that were caused by these hints of story, they could at least be excused for only being mentioned once or twice. Like the idea that the father seemingly hallucinates these rats, and it's only given one or two whispered words and a note from the wife saying that she hasn't seen any rats. There could have been another ending where the father is finally consumed by his delusions, like the portrait could have been of a disgusting rat, and the whole art studio could have been flooded with a swarm of rats that literally consume him. I want to pose one opinion that I have. The father isn't actually as bad of a guy as the game makes him out to be. He's neglectful to his wife and children? There were a couple of scenes that made me think he might have two daughters instead of just one, but in most scenes where a daughter is involved, it's on an individual level. Hell, that could have been another thing. He was such a neglectful father and husband that his wife had another daughter and he had no idea. And the mother would raise that daughter in private away from the father because she didn't like how he treated the first daughter. But yeah, he's a neglectful alcoholic, but he didn't physically abuse them. Except in one scene where he might have smacked the daughter for grabbing his booze.
Whenever Daddy's hurting, this helps the hurt go away. No, don't touch that! Oh God. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
In retrospect, a lot of the game's criticisms of the father boil down to he's an alcoholic who's absorbed in his work. They don't even flesh out the whole thing of him using body parts and fluids to paint the portrait he's working on. I theorize he was doing it to dispose of the wife's corpse after her suicide, but they never make it known or clear. And in my opinion, the way it's delivered in the game through the mandatory whispered words that you collect, it comes off as far too vague to even be interesting. The only thing that really points to it possibly being the wife's corpse is the little drawings on the wall in the daughter carousel scene where it transitions from him being drunk and the wife being all disfigured to just him alone with a knife covered in blood. They even establish that the family had a dog, but then they never do anything with it. It's kind of ridiculous how much falls flat. I went quite a long time without wanting to force myself to go for the other two endings, and I'll say that, in a vacuum, these endings are pretty okay. The family portrait ending is for sure the most fitting bookend for this game, so if you want to go for both good endings, do this one last. The self-portrait ending is so out of the blue and undeserved by the main character, I don't see how or why he would deserve to go from this universally reviled artist to having a whole exhibit around his work. Like, even Babyface is here, and there's a note about people absolutely hating that painting, so why would it be here? The only way I could even appreciate this ending is if it was long after his death and it was just one of those situations where everyone only loves an artist after he dies. I'll end this by explaining to the tiny chunk of people who might ask why I hate how everything is open to interpretation. I think, and this is just how the game's writing comes off to me, Other than the possibility that it's just unfinished and they would have actually fleshed it out, it comes off as not knowing how to finish anything, so instead they just assumed that if they left it up to interpretation, the players would immerse themselves. I am not one of those players. I don't think you can or should force immersion. If I can't grasp onto something established and concrete, why would I want to interpret everything else? Especially in a game that's this linear and repetitive. I guess I should actually talk about gameplay. If the writing is lazy and boring, how's the gameplay? It's just as good. The first time around, you'll probably end up getting the bad ending. Most people would, and I guess you could be interested and maybe a little spooked. I like the unsettling paintings the most out of everything in the game. Everything else is either a cheap excuse for a forced jump scare, or there's imagery that just comes off as hilarious instead of unsettling, especially with the baby stuff. This game calls itself psychological horror, but I don't think they actually know what psychological horror is. It seems like they thought the way to make a psychological horror game was to piss off and annoy the player, making the player hate playing the game. Honestly, they should have just made a movie, because I'd rather watch this guy walk in circles on my TV for an hour and a half. Now that it's a video game, I'll have to do it 3 times in the span of 3 hours, and be that schmuck wasting his time walking in circles, or spinning around in a dead end to make a new door appear. That's pretty much most of this game. At least the bad ending cutscene is pretty cool in a vacuum. I'd watch a movie that's just a bad ending run of this game. Come to think of it, I find that Layers of Fear has a lot of parallels with the movie Mother, especially with the heart painting and the house being this endless entity. While the other endings are pretty alright, having to replay the whole game in this specific way, having to read a walkthrough while seeing everything you've already seen before, is what ruins the entire experience. You have to destroy all semblance of intrigue and curiosity in the game to get these endings. I can't imagine being the first people to try and find these endings, having to play over and over again trying to figure out what whispered words to grab, or having to figure out that you should put the wife's phone number in the Ouija board before the absolutely awful checker scene at the end, which is the worst part of the game in my opinion, and you have to do it all 3 times. It's funny how my opinion of Layers of Fear has changed. The first time I ever played it, I hated it. The second time, I hated it. And then I wanted to go for the 2 endings. When I played it again to go for these endings, I actually had a little bit more appreciation for it, especially with the family portrait ending. And it would have stayed as a 6 out of 10 rating from me if I didn't delete the footage for that session and have to redo it in Shadowplay, which I absolutely don't regret. Something about playing this game while I was tired made me realize every problem with the writing. And now I can end this nightmare by saying that Layers of Fear is a 4 out of 10. And it's not even fun bad. If you've never played it, don't. If you've only gotten the bad ending, get the family portrait ending. Or both. If you like this game, feel free to tell me why in the comments down below, along with anyone else who wants to tell me what they thought of the video, or want to suggest more games for me to talk about. Every single comment is appreciated.